Hey, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Speak Plainly podcast, where we speak plainly about things that matter. I am your host, Owl Medicine, and in today's podcast, we're going to be talking about whether that thing that you just thought was a thing, or if that thing that you felt was a feeling, or if it was a thought. Sound confusing enough? Good. Because for most of us, trying to separate the two is really, really hard and confusing. And a lot of folks are going to get offended when I say what I'm about to say, which is you probably don't know the difference between what you think and what you feel. And that's not your fault. We aren't trained to really separate what we think from what we feel. It happens occasionally, and it happens enough that we are pretty convinced that we know the difference between a feeling and a thought. But especially when we get slightly dysregulated, the two tends to blend together. And that confuses things. That makes things a little harder for us. So that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about whether when something arises in us, it's a thought or if it's a feeling. Because there are lots and lots of reasons that not knowing the difference and not being able to tell the difference is really profoundly detrimental. Totally understandable because we don't get taught this, but utterly detrimental to our health and our happiness. So it's something worth looking into and figuring out. So we're going to look at some of those problems, and then I'm going to talk to you about the two ways that I know that have helped me to get really good at separating, is this a thought or is this a feeling? And then I'm going to introduce you to the world's greatest meditation app. It is absolutely phenomenal. If you know the name Sam Harris, then you may have heard of this app. But one of the amazing parts, I should say, is that they've never done any advertising on this. Well, most of the major companies spend about 40% of their revenue on ads on Facebook. And this app, the Waking Up app, has not spent a dime on Facebook ad revenue. They're just counting on people like me and people like you to tell other people about it. And it's phenomenal. So we'll get there, and it's a meditation app. So I'm going to give you a little bit of my background to meditation. But first, let's start off by talking about the problems that I see. Let's start off by talking about the problems that I see when we are unable to separate our thoughts from our emotions. The reason I'm bringing this up now is because I bring up the things that are prevalent in my life, because it seems that the things that are active and prevalent in my life seem to be active and prevalent in other people's lives. And I just had a conversation the other day, literally yesterday, with a friend about a miscommunication. And what happened is they went, well, I just tried to tell you how I feel and you shut me down. And it's typically my behavior to be like, oh, I'm really sorry and blah, blah, blah. That's what I try to do now. But with this specific person and this specific instance, they didn't actually tell me anything about how they felt. All they did was give me justifications and give me thoughts. There was never an emotive word used. And I had to just be like, I'm sorry, but you didn't tell me how you feel. You weren't vulnerable because you told me what you thought. And I understand it feels like a feeling, but it's not. What you gave me were justifications and excuses. None of it was vulnerable, and none of it really could fit into that defense of I was just telling you how I feel and you shut me down, because that wasn't what happened. So I really wanted to do this because I take very seriously someone's experience. I want people to feel that I care about their experience, especially this person. So I got a little upset when it was weaponized to a degree of I told you how I feel and you shut me down, and that feels terrible to me. But I was accused of something I didn't do because no one ever actually told me how they felt. So there's one example of how if we can't tell the difference, we can cause a few issues. Another reason is because we think that our thoughts are rational, and they usually are. So if we can't tell the difference between our thoughts and our emotions, then every time that we have an emotion, we automatically assume that that emotion is right because we think it's a feeling, or because, we automatically assume that that emotion is true and accurate because we think it's a thought. And it's not. It's an emotion. And so we ascribe truth to these emotions in the same way that we ascribe truth to our rational, logical thought. And you guys already know I've talked a lot about biology, biological decisions, and how emotions are rational. But they're not the same type of rational. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, go back and listen to that episode. It's a really good one. It's a really important one to understand. But if we think that, or I guess it's more accurate to say, if we experience our thoughts as emotions and our emotions as thoughts, we are gonna have this issue where we ascribe truth to our emotional reactions to things. And that is going to get us in trouble, especially any of us with trauma. And it's 2023, baby. We all got trauma. So that's another one. The last one I really want to talk about ties into the first one a little bit. It's about vulnerability. If we can't genuinely tell what is an emotion and what is a thought, then we can't be vulnerable about our emotions. All we're doing is explaining our thought processes when we're dysregulated, and we are experiencing that as vulnerability because we haven't separated our thoughts from our emotions, but it's not. And this is a serious problem for men. And I know that most of my listeners are women. And this is something that I struggle with the men in my life, especially the more heteronormative men, whether they be gay or hetero or whatever, that training is really thick in men. And they think they're being vulnerable when they're not. They're just explaining their thought processes, which is great. Explain your thought process. I want to know that too, but don't you dare come to me and tell me that that's vulnerability, that you're being emotionally vulnerable with that, because you're not. I understand it feels like you're not, and this is going to be upsetting and kind of harsh and whatever, but this has been a very real thing that's been happening a lot in my life with multiple people that I care deeply about. They haven't been able to separate their thoughts from their emotions. And when I try to be like, hey, that's not accurate. If you thought of it this way, it might be better. It gets them deeply offended. But I'm having to just go, okay, well, you can be offended. It's not my fault that you don't know how to separate these two things. And I can hold compassion for that, but I'm not going to feel bad for dysregulating another person when I am just compassionately telling them the truth. I'm not being rude. I'm not being mean. I'm not like any of that. I'm compassionately sharing my truth with them, and everything goes south. And it's all because none of us have ever been taught how to separate what we think from what we feel. And my generation, I think, is one of the worst, because we grew up, this was like, we were the ones who created, it's like this, it's like that. I feel like, it's kind of like, it's totally like, we use like all the time. Like, it's like this. Instead of, I feel that it's this way, or I think that it's this way, we're like, it's like this. And that has allowed us to communicate things in a really organic way that's kind of cool, but also has limited our ability to separate our thoughts from our emotions. Okay, so that's a list of literally the first handful that came to my mind. If you think about this much longer, I'm sure that you'll be able to come up with lots and lots of other things that are very hard, because we simply can't separate our thinking from our feeling. And this is extremely important for those of us who feel like our identity is hard to find. Our identity is really wrapped up in what our environment is putting out. We absorb and then reflect back, and that's great. It's a useful skill, but without separating what we think from what we feel, there's no chance that we can separate our reality from the reality of the people around us, the reality of the environment around us. And if you can't do that, you're going to be in for a hard ride, because you're just going to be thrown about. No matter what you do or where you go, you're going to be afraid to go out, afraid to be in public, afraid to be around people, all because you don't know how to separate yourself from them. And that begins with separating your thoughts from your emotions. So now we're going to move into some of the questions that you can ask, because really there are two ways that I've gone about learning to separate my thoughts from my emotions. There's the way that there's the very logical, rational, like metal way that I started doing in the military, and still use occasionally, quite often actually. And then there's the meditation way. And we'll get to the meditation way a little bit later, and I'll introduce you to Sam Harris and this wonderful app. But the first thing to do, if you're trying to figure out if something that you're experiencing, because these are like thoughts and emotions are both emergent phenomenon, right? There's some kind of stimulus in the environment that causes us to think or to feel a thing, but both of them arise spontaneously inside us in very similar ways. Emotions always begin as a somatic experience. Thoughts, less so. It's still a somatic experience to some degree, I might say, but I don't think we feel it in our bodies nearly as much. So that's actually a hint to answer these first couple of questions, because the first question is this a thought or is this a feeling? Just automatically, right out the gate, we have to go, hey, I don't know how to separate these two things, or I haven't been trained to separate these two things, or maybe I have, but I want to get better. So I've got to, at least as these emergent phenomenon arise, give a chance for bifurcation. We do that by asking ourselves, is this a thought or is this a feeling? Then, and you might be right, you might be wrong, but you can ask more questions. The next question is something like, what makes me think that it's a thought? Or what makes me think that this is an emotion? You're looking for evidence. So when you have a tension arise in your body, what happens if that tension is because of some perceived threat, say, your body is going to react with an emotion. And your mind is going to react to that emotion. So these little scissor sisters are really hard to separate. It's like, I almost kind of view them as like the helix, the double helix of our DNA. They're very hard to separate. And we have to consciously give them that opportunity. So we start with, is that a thought or is that a feeling? And then we go, what makes that a thought or feeling? Because if it's like a logical, rational progression, then it's probably a thought. And if it's harder to explain and is kind of vague and abstract, then it's probably started as an emotion. But keep in mind, our mind runs off of our emotions. Whatever your emotional state is will determine your mental state. So we have to go, all right, is this a thought or is this an emotion? And usually it's both at the same time. So we have to figure out what part of that is the emotion and what part of it is the thought. One of the things that makes this really complicated is that our thoughts and emotions go hand in hand. They arise spontaneously, seemingly spontaneously, inside us, and our emotions react to our thoughts. We can think about something and become sad. We can also get scared and then think negative thoughts. That's the feedback loop, but they are not the same thing. What's so complicated is that we are experiencing them both at the same time. And we really have to dig through our experience, and the order, the chronological order of our experience seems to help me a lot figure out whether something is a thought or something is an emotion. Lastly, the biggest, fastest, easiest way to figure out if it's a thought or if it's an emotion is when you describe it, did you use a word that would be called an emotion? When you describe what just happened in you, did you use words like sad, happy, empty, joyful, fearful, uncertain? Like, these are all emotions. These are all feelings. And this is especially important with negative feelings because negative feelings guide our thoughts. So if we can pin down that we started thinking negatively because of a stressful experience, then we can disregard that negative downward spiral that our mind will want to go on because of this negative emotion we've experienced. Without separating these two, that's what I believe is letting your emotions rule your world. When people say they let their emotions rule their world, their emotions run their life, they're always reactive, I think that the first step to gaining control over that is separating your thoughts from your emotions. I really think that we have to be able to not believe everything that we feel. And we have to learn to not feel everything that we think. Both of those are beautiful, beautiful things that I'm a huge fan of. I want to feel my thoughts. I love my mind. I do. I love my mind. I love getting lost in it. I love the reactions that I have to it. But I also, even more than that, I love that I have the ability to get deeply lost in thought and have these profound experiences that begin with a thought and then fill my entire body with an amazing sensory experience. But I also deeply, deeply value the fact that I can have a thought and I can also keep that physiological experience arising from the thought from overwhelming me. When it's a joyful, wonderful experience, it's some insightful thing, great, hurrah. But when I see pictures of slave trade or abused children, I ought to be offended and feel bad and all of that. But if that has the same profound effect on me that the wonderful insight does, where my whole body experiences this emotional and physiological sensory state because of my thoughts, I'm screwed. Because we are inundated constantly with tons and tons of negative crap. We are always being shown the best of the best and the worst of the worst, and we're having profound reactions to it all of the time. So it's paramount that we learn to separate our thinking from our feeling. Now, I told you that there were two ways that I could do this. There's a couple of logical questions that you can ask, and that's the first way that I started to separate the two for myself. And then there is the practice of meditation. I've talked about meditation a little bit on this podcast, and I don't talk about it more because there's a lot of folks who really hate the word meditation and hate the word mindfulness. I've started switching it about 6 months back. I started switching it to attention training because attention, focus, is the single most valuable thing that you have. It is the single most valuable thing that I have. When it comes to experiencing this world and going through this life, the one thing that you have to have in order to accomplish anything is the ability to focus. If you cannot focus, you can't do anything. And there are basically, I would say, two types of focus. There's like organic, and then there is guided or forced focus. And Organic focus is when you get scared and something draws your attention and you're super focused on it, or you're super excited about something and that draws your attention to that thing and you get really, really focused on it. That's great. But again, that leaves you at the whim of whatever the world around you is doing. And that's not cool for me, because I just don't want to be thrown around like that anymore. I enjoy my highs, I enjoy my lows, they're great, but I want to be in some control of that. I don't want to be thrown around. And the way to not be thrown around is to learn to separate your thoughts from your feeling and learn to direct our focus instead of just having organic focus on whatever feels good or draws our attention or is the most interesting thing in the room at the time. If you want to do anything with your life, you have to learn to focus yourself. What I've been describing as far as like these just a couple 3 questions that you can ask yourself in a row, all that does is like wet the whistle of like asking yourself questions to really like use a fine-tooth comb over your experience to see what's happening in what order so you can better understand yourself. The unexamined life is not worth living is the whole, like, that's the phrase, right? And this is how we examine our lives. Our life is nothing but a series of experiences. And the more we go through these experiences with a fine-tooth comb and really focus our attention on them, the more fulfilling it can be, because you recognize how rich every single moment is. Which just, I mean, that sounds like a beautiful way to transition into the conversation of meditation. So now we're going to move away from the logical, like, here's a couple of questions to get you down this road, and people who despise meditation, you can use that. I did for a long time. I still do, actually. I also do meditation regularly. I have been doing it more regularly now, sometimes twice a day, because of this app that I'm using. It's the Wake Up app, and it's awesome. But first, before I talk about the app, let me talk about meditation and the mindfulness, what I'm calling attention training. Because the first step of meditation, and there are a million types of meditation is simply a form of training. It's a way to train the mind. And we train the mind in the exact same way that we train any other body part. We have to do reps. We have to exercise it. I think one of the biggest reasons that people don't like meditation is because they've never been told how to do it or what it's for. We don't have gurus in the West anymore, not like, well, or really ever. So we're kind of left to our own devices. There's apps and things, and it's getting better, but for the most part, mindfulness is just one big umbrella word that gets slapped around on everything, and it's an entire universe. Like, mindfulness is an entire universe unto itself. But the first step of any of them, whether you're going to be going down a road later on of meditation where you're exclusively training your focus, or you're exclusively training metta, which is like loving kindness meditation, whether you're exclusively training this an austerity where you're trying to not move whenever you feel uncomfortable, that like each of those are 4 specific things. Focusing your attention and being incredible at commanding your own attention has lots and lots of applications to it. Sitting really still, even when you're in pain, and forcing yourself to stay in that position when you're uncomfortable, also has applications. Real world ones, like when you know that you have to do something that you don't want to do that is uncomfortable. You have experienced recently, because it's a practice, we're meant to do this over and over and over again, not just as a Band-Aid to put over top of a cut, but as a maintenance for keeping our mind in tip-top shape. So when we experience this pain, or we have to do something where we're going to experience pain, we have recently at least exposed ourselves to a situation where we did something that was good for us, that was uncomfortable, and that makes it easier. So each type of meditation, and there's thousands of them, have their own unique like path and application. And that's the number one reason that people get really confused with meditation and mindfulness, is because they don't understand that there's a million different ways to do it, and each one is like specialized to build a certain part of your body. Just like if you go to the gym and you're doing a bunch of preacher curls, you're going to be working your biceps. If you're doing lat pull downs, you're going to be working your lats. And each muscle and muscle group that you're working work together to make the whole organism work better. That's mindfulness. Mindfulness is essentially that for your brain. Or meditation, I guess I should say, is that for your brain, because there's a million different ways. Like meditation is like going to the gym. There's a million different ways that you can work your body, a million different ways that you can work your brain, and each one helps you do certain stuff, and hopefully they get organized in a way that they work together to make your body and your brain more useful to you. And maybe more beautiful. I think the next biggest reason that people suffer when they even think of meditation is because we look at the end result of meditation. Using the gym analogy, it's like people avoid meditation or hate meditation because they tried it once and then expected Mr. Olympia results. They expected physique training results after like 20 years of training. They expected that level of peace and that level of insight and that level of blah, blah, blah. And they felt they failed if they didn't achieve that at the end of their 5, 10, or 20-minute meditation. And that's just functionally impossible. It's functionally impossible. That's the equivalent of going into the gym once and being mad that you didn't win a bodybuilding competition. But nobody says that. So we're left to our own devices because we don't have teachers and gurus, like I said. The reality is the first step of meditation is to develop your ability to command your focus. That's always the case. That's why you focus on the breath, is because what you're doing is you're training your ability to focus on one single thing. And it's really hard. It's really, really hard to focus on one single thing, especially for ADHD brains. And I mean, it's hard for everybody, but pretty much everybody's neurodivergent anymore, it seems. So for all of us, it's difficult to train our minds to focus on one thing and one thing only at a time. But that's what we have to do. Each time that your mind wanders and you call it back, that's the equivalent of, as your mind wanders, that's the eccentric pull. That's like letting the dumbbell down, and calling it back is the curl. And you have to do that over and over and over and over and over and over again. So if you sit down to meditate and all you're doing is screwing it up because you can't stop your mind from wandering, you're doing it right. 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 Please understand you're doing it right. If you sit down to meditate and all you're doing is your mind is wandering and you're just constantly trying to bring it back, you're doing it right. That's meditation. Yay. Congratulations. It doesn't feel great, but you really have to set this up in your head as like that is the reward. You did your job. It's about the journey, not the destination, right? And the journey is each time you got to pull your mind back over and over and over and over and over again. And the more times you do it, the better you'll get at it. The shorter it will be between when you do your let down of the dumbbell and when you curl it back. It'll be a shorter amount of time between when your mind wanders and you notice that it has wandered and you gently bring it back. And we say gently because don't judge yourself for it. That's part of it. Like you don't go to the gym and get mad that you put the dumbbell down. You don't go to the gym and get mad when you put the dumbbell down because you know you have to put it down in order to bring it back up, because bringing it back up is the exercise. Bringing your mind back to the present moment, onto your breath, onto the tip of your nose, onto the sensations on your skin, whatever the point of focus is, does not matter. We use breath because breath is the easiest thing to focus on because there is a constant change. You're either usually inhaling, exhaling, or getting ready to. That's great for us because it's easiest for us to put our mind on that sensation because the sensation is always changing. It's very easy to lose ourselves, lose our body, lose our proprioception, that sort of thing. So we do it on the breath. That's the reason it's the breath. It's nothing magical about it, although breathing has incredible magical qualities, like beyond keeping us alive, obviously. But it doesn't matter that it's the breath. You can just focus on the tip of your nose and feeling the cool air coming in and out. But the fact that it's changing regularly makes it easier to focus on. That's the only reason that we're doing that. And you're building your attention. That's the whole purpose. So every time that your mind wanders and you bring it back, congratulations. That's the work. You are doing the work and you're doing it right. And this is why I wrote that article a couple of years ago called Why You Might Want to Be a Crappy Meditator. Because we're all meant to be crappy meditators at first. What we're doing is we're learning to control our focus. And our focus is scattered because we're animals. Our focus is scattered because we're always looking for opportunities and we're always looking to avoid threats. That's the reality of it. We're predispositioned to have our mind wander. So if you get mad at yourself about meditation because your mind is wandering, don't. That's literally the whole purpose. That's literally the entire purpose. So when your mind wanders and you come back to and you bring it back, that's a rep. Good work. And each one of those reps is developing our ability for self-directed focus. And self-directed focus is the key to the world. It's the key to your freedom. It's the key to your joy. It's the key to everything positive and good in your life. Self-directed focus allows you to focus on the things that matter and not focus on the things that don't. So my experience with meditation really began when I got out of the military. I had done a little bit here and there, like in the military, but when I got out of the military and suddenly my time was entirely my own, I had no idea what in the hell to do. And I knew I was deeply screwed up and I was drinking a lot, and I dove really, really hard into meditation and into Buddhism. I started going to all my local sanghas. I was meditating every single day. I had a very militant way of going about my meditations. I spent months trying to count to 100 without losing track of what number I was on or letting my mind wander. And every time I tried to bring it back, I started the process over. I started counting over at 1. And it took months and months and months and months for me to ever reach 100. And I also can admit that I don't think I actually reached 100. There were a couple of times where I was like, okay, this is ridiculous. I can't go that far. This is nuts. But I would get pretty far, and doing that over and over and over again trained me. It trained me not just to do the reps to bring back my mind, but it also trained me. I mentioned eccentric exercises, or eccentric loading is, so imagine doing a pull-up, and we think of the pulling up on the pull-up to be the exercise, but we can also work those same muscles by slowly letting ourselves down, and those are eccentric exercises, where we are working a muscle under tension, but instead of contracting, it's elongating. And I kind of did the same thing with that form of meditation that I just heard of and then decided to force myself into, not knowing anything. But what I got good at was that eccentric part, which the mindfulness equivalent of is noticing when my mind started to wander, tracing it back, and putting myself back on the, quote, right track, basically just being able to focus again. And I loved it. I dove really deeply into it, but I also hated it. I hated pretty much every moment of it. I did it because I knew it was good for me. I didn't understand what meditation was, even with reading Old Path White Cloud and Siddhartha and going to the sanghas and having the vegetarian meals and listening to the dharma talks and doing all the things. I did not understand Buddhism until one day I realized that I didn't want to be a Buddhist in that way. I am a Buddhist because it's more of a philosophy. But what I realized is I was trying to basically be like a Buddhist monk, because Siddhartha, the Buddha, his whole thing was eliminating suffering. And I was like, I'm going to do that. I'm going to eliminate suffering. But then I realized that I don't want that life. I actually really enjoy my ups and my downs, and I don't want to lose those. The whole point of being alive to me is to experience the aliveness of it, and I don't want to be non-attached. I simply want to be able to detach when I have to. That changed everything. That changed absolutely everything for me and for my understanding of meditation and what it's for. When I realized this isn't what I'm trying to do, I was able to kind of drop the militant approach to everything and be like, so what's exactly is happening here? And I came to these realizations that like there's a million different types and a million different ways, and they're all great. They all do different things, but the first step of all of them is to control our focus, to be able to direct our attention where we want, when we want. That is the single greatest superpower on the planet. The reason that we're all on Facebook and Instagram and TikTok and all the social media things, they're all free. They're all free, but they make billions, well, trillions of dollars altogether, I'm sure. And they make all of that by selling your focus to advertisers. These companies are making billions and billions of dollars off of selling just your attention. If we ping them enough, if we send enough random notifications and likes and like buzz their pockets enough time in their field of experience, then we will get their focus. Being able to control our focus is going to prevent us from doing things like that spur of the moment online shopping as a coping mechanism. We can choose to do it as a coping mechanism, be like, I feel bad, so I'm going to do some shopping, and that's fine. I don't have a problem with that. My issue is when these things happen automatically without my permission. When that happens and I'm like, oh, I shouldn't have done that. I shouldn't have bought that. Why did I order these? Like those kinds, and luckily I only ever usually put them in my shopping cart, and that's it. If I really like it, I'll put it in my shopping cart and then I'll leave it there and I'll just go out of the thing hoping to get the same advertisement again. What they're all vying for is our focus. Your focus is your superpower. And the focus is what allows us to separate our thought from our feelings. Only when we focus on what happened first, what happened second. Is this a sensation or is this a logical progression? Those are the questions that we can ask ourselves without meditation even. But meditation makes asking those questions a lot easier because we've practiced maintaining focus. Because you might ask yourself one of those questions, maybe even two of those questions, but then you'll get distracted with something else and you won't ask anymore to get to the root of the problem. The beauty of meditation is that it trains your attention, trains your focus, so you can ask those questions in a sequential manner, so you can get to the heart of a problem, and it provides you the space to do that, where you carve out 5, 10, 15 minutes of your day, whatever. You carve out these portions of your day that are exclusively to help train your attention, and then throughout your day, you can use that attention. You can use the attention during the meditation. Once you develop your ability to focus and your mind isn't wandering every half a second, then you have the ability to do things like meta meditation, where you're focusing on what it feels like to think positive, loving, kind thoughts about someone else, about the world. There is a physiological experience that comes along with when we think positively. And metta is the practice of touching that experience over and over and over again. And what that does is it shows us, it gives us the experience that when we focus on loving, kind things, rather than all the negative stuff, which is the bias of our brain, our physical, literal experience, which is all that we have, our life is nothing but a series of experiences. So when we do metta, we experience in real time that thinking positively is a powerful antidote. And I'm not talking toxic positivity. I'm talking thinking about loving, kind, compassionate things. That's why it's called metta meditation. It's loving kindness is the translation for metta. We get to experience that in our bodies in real time. It's incredible. But again, that's a little bit down the road after you've learned to focus a little bit. And it doesn't need to be all that much, but you have to start with some, right? Like you have to be able to control your focus. You don't need to sit down and be able to lock yourself into singular focused attention for 30 or 45 minutes. That's impossible. No one can do that. Nobody born can do that. Unless, I don't know, maybe some savant. I guess I shouldn't say nobody, but I'm sure as hell not doing it, and you probably aren't either. So that's my little overview of my experience with meditation and learning what it actually is. Because when I first started, I really thought that meditation was sitting in a white room with no noise and staring at a wall with my eyes 90% closed, and I had to sit there perfectly straight, perfectly still, not move, be aware of my breathing. And by the way, I don't know if anybody else has this problem with meditation. When I try too hard on meditation, I know that I'm trying too hard, and this took years to figure out, but I know that I'm trying too hard when I become hypoxic. Has anybody else had this experience where you sit down to go like meditate and you don't know when to breathe? They're like, oh, just follow the breath. I'm trying, but I'm literally not breathing. I'm literally not breathing. I will die. Meditation will kill me because if I try, I die. I just don't breathe. I stop breathing, and I'm always playing catch up with the breath. And it's like, it's a panicky feeling that happens when we become hypoxic because we're so focused on our breath consciously that the subconscious drive doesn't drive our lungs. You know, like how you will breathe on your own if you don't think about it, but then if you think about it, you can control your breath. Well, meditation it really screwed with me on this, and it still does. It still does. I still will like catch myself focusing so hard on my breath that I'm not breathing, or that like there's weird things that happen, and the only way to deal with it is to just move through it and keep doing it. But I just wanted to say that for anybody else who has this weird hypoxic like freak out when they're trying to do meditation, because when you focus on your breath, you just stop breathing. You're not alone. Keep doing it. I'll just try to switch into like horizon mode. That way I'm trying to see everything in the periphery instead of just one thing. And somehow that helps the breathing. So there's your little tip for people who get hypoxic and freak out during meditation like I do. The last thing I'm going to talk about is this amazing meditation app. It's called Waking Up. And Waking Up is an absolutely phenomenal app. If you haven't heard of Sam Harris is a neuroscience, a philosopher, a New York Times best-selling author, and the host of the Making Sense podcast. And he is the one who created the Waking Up app. This guy is really great. He brings both the neuroscience perspective and his own like 30 years of meditation experience. And the reason I love this app is because I already had a meditation app that I use. It's a great app. And the reason I love this other app, it's just called Mindfulness, and it's got a little. It's just like, I'll put both of them in the show notes. But the Mindfulness app was actually designed by the VA, and that's the part of the reason I like it, is it was designed by the VA for people, for veterans with PTSD and whatever, and really anybody who wanted access to this mindfulness information. It's very simple. It's made by the VA. It's clearly got its demographic. It's very like, here it is. This is simple. Here's your timer. You can set your time limit. It's free, and I love it. But you have to want to meditate, and then you'll be like, okay, I'm going to use this app. I don't do notifications on my phone, just so everybody knows, because that kind of thing makes a difference for me. I do turn on the notifications for this app, but turns out that I don't actually have to wait for my notifications. I went ahead a couple of times, because you get notifications each day, because it's called Waking Up because he likes you to do it first thing in the morning, because it starts your day different. And that's a really powerful thing. We've talked a little bit about starting your day and the power that starting your day in a thoughtful way has. But this is a phenomenal app because most of the time you get like a little dharma talk, just like 5 minutes or whatever, and then you do a meditation. And it's him, and he's got a wonderful soft voice. It's not like I have a thing with voices. It's kind of like I don't like little. There's sounds that I just don't like, and I like the sound of his voice. It's totally fine, and he doesn't interrupt too much. I don't like when meditation apps or meditation teachers are just constantly interrupting. My thoughts are interrupting my experience enough. Please let me just do that. Anyway, he's great at this because I like his voice. He doesn't interrupt very much, and he frames meditation in a very similar way that I do. That he's very explicit from the beginning that it's about focus. It's about attention training. And he talks about the different types, and he talks about the progression of mindfulness and the progression of the development of attention. And I think that's the key that most people don't have, and that's really why I love it. He talks about the progression and how it all changes, how it starts one way and then it changes and then it'll change again and it can change again. But I love that he provides a functional framework for the Western mind on how to think of and conceptualize mindfulness so we can feel like we've done a good job with it. You know, if we don't have a marker for success, everything feels like a failure. And framing mindfulness and meditation appropriately gives us markers for success. That's why I went through that's why I went through explaining the whole, like, doing a curl, letting it down, your mind wandering, pulling it back up. That's a rep. And you're working out your mind. And you got to do it regularly in the same way that you do your body. That gives us a goal. And only when we have a goal can we succeed. So the third and final reason I think most people don't like meditation is because they never had a goal. They never knew what the marker for success was. And if you don't have a marker for success, you will fail every time. And that's why it feels like we fail at meditation. So your marker for success is, did your mind wander and did you bring it back? That is your marker for success now. Did your mind wander and did you bring it back? If you did, you succeeded. That is meditation. In this app, he gives us a chance to succeed. And it's a pretty cheap app. There is a 14-day trial for the Waking Up app. Anybody can go and download that right now, get a 14-day free trial. It doesn't seem like they do monthly subscriptions, which I think is awesome, actually, because I mean, that's a cheap investment. It's about $130, $120. It's basically $10 a month. It would come out to $10 a month for the app. But if you're only paying $10 or something, you don't appreciate it as much. And you're not going to use it as much. Whereas if you have to pay $125 in one lump sum, you're probably going to stay more engaged. So I thought that was a great business strategy. But I'm broke. And it's the end of the month, and I don't get paid until next week. So when my 14-day trial ended, I was like really sad. Well, it was ending. I actually upped it a day early. I was really sad because I was like, oh, I have to wait. I'm broke and I've got a lot I'm supposed to do this month. And not just this month, but this whole year. I still need to go visit my grandma who just got a breast cancer diagnosis. She lives in Indiana. That's a $500 flight. And I'm going to a wedding next month and got a bunch of repairs that I have to do. So money's tight, and I think that's true for everybody. You got your own stuff going on, and money is tight for all of us. He understands that. They understand it so well that they, like I said, have done no advertising, and they just rely on people to share this app with other people. And if you can't afford it, they don't want anybody not having access to this app just because they can't afford it. So there are actually scholarships for the app. They want everyone on this app, and that made me just, I couldn't love this anymore. That really made me want to support them in every way possible, and that's why I'm bringing them up on this podcast. Obviously this is not sponsored by Waking Up. It's not sponsored by anybody. It's all just because I love this app. I love what it's doing. And I love that it makes me want to engage with it. Like I said, the mindfulness app that I had that's been built by the VA that I use, I like. I use it, but I only use it when I'm like, hey, I haven't meditated in a couple of days. I really need to do that, and I'll use the app, and because like, you can keep track and that sort of thing, and you can set your timer. But this one, I can't wait every day for the new little 5-minute talk and the little 5 or 10-minute meditation practice. I look forward to it, and I want you to look forward to it, because nothing is as powerful as meditation for many, many people, myself included. I'm a very cognitive and rational person in a lot of ways, and so I found rational approaches to do the same thing that meditation does. And not that meditation isn't rational; it is extremely rational. But I think you understand what I mean. But this app is marvelous, and I hope that you'll give it a try. If you don't know who Dr. Sam Harris is, Google his name, find some of his interviews. He's done some remarkable interviews, and I'm sure that you'll love him. We've got to learn to separate what we think from what we feel. And in order to do that, we need to develop focus. There's a couple of ways that we can develop focus, but meditation is one of the best. It's the biggest bang for your buck. And if you have issues with meditation, please try this app. Keep in mind that you're not the only one who becomes hypoxic. That if your mind is constantly wandering and racing and you're just constantly trying to bring it back, then you're doing it. You're doing great work. That is great work. Every single time you bring your mind back, that's a rep. That is a success. That is a win. So keep that in mind when you go to do your meditation practice. Now that I have the app, I have the ability to share the app with people and provide them a 30-day free trial instead of a 14-day free trial. So I'm going to put that link in the show notes. I don't get anything for it. I don't care. I want everyone to use this app because it's great, and they have scholarships for those of us who are kind of broke. And please use this. It's phenomenal. It makes me want to meditate. So that will be in the show notes for you to download, get your 30-day free trial, and learn to separate your thoughts from your emotions. It's really hard. They feed off of each other. They're two peas in a pod, but they are two peas. Until we learn to separate those two peas, we're gonna be in for a hard ride that we're not really in charge of. We've got to learn to self-direct our focus and not just have this organic focus that comes from our environment. Thank you so much for listening. If you've made it this far, you're awesome. If you like the episode, consider donating on Patreon or supporting through Buy Me a Coffee. If you want to get one-on-one or group coaching by me, all of my information is available on alchrysalismedicine.com. That will also be linked, alchrysalismedicine/coaching. It'll take you to a place where you can automatically schedule, and I will see you guys next time. And remember, stay curious and stay uncomfortable.